2 girls missing for 5 years. Found after a rancher's German shepherd refused to leave a hidden canyon. The red rock country of Cedar Basin held its silence the way mountains hold their age, heavy and unmoving. Winter hadn't arrived yet, but it was close enough to taste. The sky had that brittle, metallic tint Utah gets before the first snow, and the wind carried the edge of something colder coming down from the high ridge. Hank Marlowe felt it in his bones long before the storm clouds began to gather. At 58, he moved slower than he used to, shoulders stiff from years of ranch work and from the ache that had settled into him ever since Linda passed. The house hadn't been the same since. The land hadn't either. Only Bruno remained a constant presence, a German shepherd with a hard stare and a quiet loyalty, a dog Hank had rescued from a canine retirement unit 2 years earlier. The dog was trained to work, trained to protect, and trained to watch. And lately, he had been watching the canyon more than usual. Hank rode the fence line with a calm familiarity. His gloves were cracked and pale from years of wear, his breath visible in the cooling air. Bruno trotted ahead, nose low to the ground, ears twitching with every shift in the wind. The dog usually ranged in wide arcs, checking scent trails the way other dogs check for food. But today he stayed close. Too close. The breeze shifted, colder now, and Bruno froze. Not slowed, not hesitated, stopped. Every muscle in his body locked tight, tail straight, ears speared forward, his claws dug into the red dirt. His throat worked around a sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a warning, but something in between. A sound that vibrated low and steady, as if coming from his chest. Hank pulled his reins gently. "What is it, boy? Deer, cougar?" But Bruno didn't act like he smelled a predator. He acted like he sensed something alive, something familiar. The dog moved 3 steps toward a wall of overgrown juniper near the canyon's lip, then turned back and pressed his shoulder against Hank's leg, almost pushing him out of the saddle. It startled Hank. Bruno never did that. He wasn't a clingy dog. He wasn't a panicker. If anything, he'd been too calm for a working shepherd. Yet now he pawed hard at the ground, raking it until red dust rose around his legs. His breath came fast, fogging the air. Hank slid down from the saddle. The wind stung his face. Whatever Bruno had picked up, it wasn't a scent the dog wanted to ignore. Hank nudged the branches aside. All he saw was rock. Solid wall. Nothing. Bruno lunged forward and shoved his head in deeper, pushing under Hank's arm. There was a desperation in it. Not fear. Urgency. "Easy," Hank muttered, but the words felt wrong the moment he spoke them, because nothing about Bruno was easy right now. The dog trembled from shoulders to paws. Hank stepped closer, bending low to part the branches more. That was when he saw it. Thin split in the sandstone. A crack no wider than his shoulders, hidden perfectly behind the splay of juniper. A shadow behind a shadow. He'd ridden past this same stretch of canyon for 20 years and had never noticed anything but rock. Bruno paced beside him, panting, whining now. But it wasn't the sound of fear, it was the sound of recognition. Something about that chilled Hank deeper than the wind. Hidden Still Canyon wasn't a place people went. It was a dead end. Locals said the wind didn't move there. Even in summer the air felt wrong, heavy, shallow, a place that didn't belong to people anymore. Hank swallowed hard. He knew the stories. Everyone in Cedar Basin did. 5 years ago, 2 girls had gone missing somewhere near here. Lily Carter, Zoe Mitchell. They'd ridden their bikes home on a bright October afternoon and were never seen again. The search lasted months. Volunteers swept every canyon, every ridge, every creek bed. Thousands of hours, dozens of dogs, no sign. And suddenly here was Bruno, refusing to leave a canyon sealed by time. Hank crouched to get a closer look at the crack. The air that escaped was cold. Too cold. And underneath the chill was something else. Not rot, not animal scent, something faint, metallic, human. His pulse thudded once, hard enough to hurt. Bruno shoved him again, this time harder, nearly knocking him forward. The dog's tail was down, but his ears stayed locked on the crack. He didn't break focus for a second. This wasn't random. This wasn't curiosity. This was a dog remembering something he had never been told. A dog on some inner track Hank couldn't see. The wind whipped higher along the ridge. Bruno barked once, a sharp, commanding sound that felt like an order. And then, from deep inside the crack, something answered. A sound so faint Hank almost convinced himself he imagined it. A metallic clink, like a latch, or a dropped tool, or a chain-brushing stone. Bruno's entire body jolted. His bark turned into a furious growl. He clawed at the dirt, at the rock, at the branches. He wanted in. He needed in. Hank whispered, "God help us." Because he realized, in that breathless second, that Bruno wasn't just reacting to danger, he was reacting to someone. The dog turned, met Hank's eyes with a look too human to ignore, then pressed his head under Hank's hand, as if asking permission. Before Hank could decide, the faint sound from inside the canyon came again. This time clearer. A child's cough. Hank felt the world tilt. Bruno bolted forward, teeth baring at the crack, paws digging as if trying to tear the rock away. The snow clouds pressed lower. The wind died, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt like the land itself was listening. Something was alive in Hidden Still Canyon. And Bruno, a dog who had never hesitated a day in his life, was telling Hank Marlowe the truth he had tried to bury for 5 long years. The missing weren't gone. The canyon wasn't empty. And whatever waited inside, Bruno had known it was there long before Hank did. Bruno dug like the earth itself had done him wrong. His claws ripped through red dust and loose stone, sending little avalanches of gravel down the slope. He wasn't just scratching, he was excavating. Every stroke was hard, fast, precise, his chest heaving, breath loud in the narrow space between rock and juniper. "Bruno, hey!" Hank grabbed for the dog's collar, fingers closing on thick fur for half a second, before Bruno shook him off with a violent twist of his shoulders. The shepherd swung back to the crack in the rock, nose jammed so deep his whiskers brushed cold stone. He inhaled in rapid, noisy pulls, nostrils flaring as if he could drag whatever scent he'd found straight out of the canyon by force. His ears stayed pinned forward. His tail never wagged. This wasn't excitement. This was need. Hank's heart was still pounding from that faint sound he thought he'd heard. That cough, that could have been anything. A rock shifting, a bird wing. His imagination finally cracking under years of silence and regret. But Bruno wasn't imagining anything. The dog's whole body said one simple thing. Someone is there. Easy. Hank tried again, but his voice came out thin. His throat felt tight. His mind kept sliding backward whether he wanted it to or not. 5 years. Same canyon wall, same wind, same cold creeping in early. Different dog at his side. Back then the sheriff had asked for volunteers, and Cedar Basin had answered. Ranchers, teachers, high school kids, retirees. They had all shown up with flashlights and ATVs, on horseback and on foot. Hank had been one of them, standing in the gravel lot behind the volunteer fire station, watching as the search coordinator unrolled maps on the hood of a pickup. 2 girls, Lily Carter, 13, who barrel raced at the county fair every summer and always had dust on her jeans. Zoe Mitchell, 12, who played violin in church and rode everywhere on a bright blue bike with streamers on the handlebars. They left school. They never got home. Lily's mother had clutched a photo to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Zoe's dad had kept staring down the empty road, as if his daughter might appear any moment, late but laughing, apologizing because her chain broke or she saw a hawk and followed it. They never appeared. Search grids were drawn, crews were assigned. They swept creek beds and culverts, abandoned sheds, old mine shafts, every ditch deep enough to hide a bike. Hank had ridden this same fence line 100 times that winter, eyes burning, back aching, scanning for anything out of place. And every time he rode past Hidden Still Canyon, someone else was already there. Walter Hodge. Back then he'd been the face of the search. County Search and Rescue Captain, broad-shouldered, kind-eyed, with a voice steady enough to calm hysterical parents and firm enough to keep dozens of volunteers moving. Hank remembered his orange vest, his radio barking at his hip, the way people looked at him like he was the one thin rope between them and collapse. Canyon's a dead end, Walter had told the crowd the first week. We've been all through it. No tracks going in, none coming out. We're better off pushing north towards the dry wash. He'd said it with such certainty that no one argued. Hank hadn't, either. He had ridden past this same line of juniper and rock over and over, trusting the maps, trusting the man with the whistle around his neck and the search plans in his hands. The canyon had stayed what it had always been to him. A bad feeling. A cold place. Empty. Bruno's growl yanked him back to the present. The sound was low and continuous, so deep it felt more like it came from the stone than the dog. Hank grabbed his collar again, and this time managed to haul him half a step back. "Bruno, enough! You're going to break your damn paws." The dog whipped his head and fixed Hank with a look that startled him. Bruno was not a stare-down dog. He listened. He took direction. It was part of what made him so easy to work with. Now his eyes burned with something Hank hadn't seen before. Refusal. Hank's fingers tightened on the collar. 2 girls, 2 bikes that never made it home, yellow ribbons gone pale on fence posts, Linda watching the news in the evenings with the sound low and her hands twisting in her lap. And later, after the search was called off, her fingers doing that same twisting as she sat in an infusion chair at the oncology ward, tubes snaking from her arm, eyes on the snow outside. Hank had not been able to save any of them. Not the girls, not his wife. Bruno wrenched free again and slammed his shoulder into the rock, nose pushing into the crack. His body went rigid. He inhaled once, sharply. Then he barked. Not a random bark, not an anxious volley. 2 sharp bursts, a pause, then one long, loud call. The pattern cut through Hank's skin like a wire. He had seen that exact sequence once before. Not here, not now. In a training video the animal shelter director had shown him the day he filled out adoption papers. "This boy used to work our," she had said casually, gesturing at the screen with a pen. "Search and rescue. State unit borrowed him from a K-9 program down south during that missing kids case a few years back. Took a hit to the hip in a fall. Nothing major, but they retired him early. Too expensive to keep rehabbing a dog his age when younger ones are waiting in line." On the screen, a German shepherd, almost identical to Bruno in build and color, had moved through timber, nose down, handler behind him. When the dog found the hidden volunteer in the scrub, he'd done the same thing. 2 sharp barks. Pause. 1 long ringing alert. Bruno barked again now, that same pattern exploding between the canyon walls. Cold crawled up Hank's spine. He had skimmed Bruno's paperwork when he brought him home. Seen the dates, seen the case file number typed in one corner and skipped over it, because he didn't want to drag someone else's tragedy into his barn. He wanted a working dog to help him move cattle and keep coyotes honest, not a reminder. Now the numbers rearranged themselves in his memory. Year, month, county code. Lily and Zoe. 5 years ago, Bruno hadn't been sleeping on some concrete kennel floor waiting for a second chance. He had been here, on this land, on this very search. Hank felt his knees go loose. He leaned a hand on the rock, trying to steady his breathing. The wind gusted and shifted, blowing from the crack outward. Bruno's nose drank in whatever scent rode that draught, and the dog let out a sound Hank had never heard from him, a whine that broke in the middle, like his voice couldn't decide if it belonged to now or then. "Were you with them?" Hank whispered, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "You remember this place." The canyon swallowed his voice whole. Bruno shoved again, muscles bunching. Before Hank could grab him, the shepherd slipped sideways into the crack, body flattening, ribs brushing stone as he forced himself into the narrow passage. His claws clicked ahead of him. His tail vanished last, fur scraping rock. "Bruno!" Hank lunged, palms smacking cold sandstone. The gap was tighter than it looked, not built for a man with shoulders as wide as his. The darkness beyond felt like a throat waiting to close. From inside came the sound of paws on rock. Then that alert bark again, echoing and distorted. Two short. Pause. One long. The same signal he had given for a live find in the video. For a person. For someone breathing. Hank's chest hurt. His brain scrambled for reasons. Maybe some drifter had holed up back there. Maybe some illegal camp. Maybe nothing but an old memory burned so deep into Bruno's working brain that he was chasing ghosts. But ghosts didn't cough, and trained dogs didn't alert on nothing. He could walk away. Call the sheriff from the ridge. Pretend he hadn't heard anything. Pretend he hadn't watched his dog crawl into the dark for somebody that might not exist. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Linda's voice came back to him, clear as if she were standing at his shoulder, the way she'd sounded the day they'd driven home from the last community vigil for the girls. "Nothing is worse than not knowing," she had said quietly, looking out the truck window. "If it were our child, I would want someone to keep looking, even if there was no good news at the end of it." Hank opened his eyes. The crack waited. Bruno barked again, deeper inside now, urgency climbing. Hank took one step forward, then another, turning his body sideways. His shoulders scraped rock. Dust filled his nose and mouth. The cold inside the canyon was a different thing than the air outside. Not just temperature, a stillness that had weight. He drew in a breath and squeezed himself into the hidden passage after the dog, the sound of Bruno's voice pulling him on. For the first time in 5 years, Hank Marlowe was not riding past Hidden Still Canyon. He was going in. And the one leading him wasn't a map, or a man with a whistle, or a search grid. It was a German shepherd who refused to forget. The crack swallowed sound the moment Hank stepped inside. The wind, the rustle of juniper branches, even the creak of his own saddle leather on the horse outside faded into a deep, breathless quiet. The air smelled of cold stone and something faintly human, something lived in. Bruno stayed in front, his silhouette a tense shadow against the sliver of pale light behind them. His paws clicked on the rock with quick, cautious certainty. Hank pressed a hand along the canyon wall to steady himself. The passage was so tight he had to angle his shoulders to fit. The rock scraped his jacket. Dust floated in the narrow beam of light that trailed in from behind. Every few feet the shepherd stopped, sniffed hard, then took another deliberate step, tail stiff and low. "You know this place," Hank whispered. It wasn't a question. Bruno's ears flicked back at the sound of Hank's voice, then forward again, laser fixed on the dark ahead. Another few feet in, the crack widened just enough for Hank to catch the faint outline of footprints pressed into the dirt between stone patches. Too small to be an adult's, too narrow, too light. He crouched, touching one with trembling fingers. Old impressions, but not 5 years old. The desert erased things fast. These tracks were from months ago, weeks, maybe even days. Someone's been using this, Hank murmured. Bruno bristled at the word someone. He moved ahead, nose close to the ground, each breath loud in the cramped space. He rounded a slight bend, and for a moment Hank lost sight of him. Then came a sudden, sharp clang. Metal on stone. Hank jerked upright, heart hammering so hard he felt it in his ears. The sound echoed down the passage, bouncing off the walls until he couldn't tell where it came from. Bruno launched forward with a low, dangerous growl, not the uncertain sound of fear, the confident sound of a trained dog identifying a point of interest. "Hold up!" Hank hissed and picked up his pace. His shoulders scraped against the narrowing walls. Dust filled his nostrils. The shepherd disappeared into a pocket of deeper shadow. Another sound followed. Softer. A scuff. Then a quick set of steps moving away, light enough to belong to a child. Hank froze. A memory struck him with brutal clarity. 5 years earlier, on a different day, different canyon, he had heard something similar. Volunteers had been combing a ridge, calling Lily and Zoe's names, and he'd sworn he heard footsteps behind a cluster of boulders. He'd hurried over, hope rising so fast it hurt, and found nothing but a startled jackrabbit darting into the sagebrush. He had told himself for years that he imagined it, that grief played tricks. But now, in this narrow passage, he wasn't imagining anything. The air still carried the faint vibration of that sound. Someone small was in here. He swallowed hard, throat dry. "Bruno," he whispered. The dog answered with a low rumble, deeper than his chest should have been able to hold. When Hank rounded the bend, he found Bruno standing at the mouth of a chamber the size of a small room. His stance was rigid. His ears were flat. His gaze was fixed on a second, even narrower opening on the chamber's far end. Hank stepped inside slowly, eyes adjusting to thin light leaking from cracks above. Dusty blankets lay folded against one wall. A tin cup on the ground. Small prints everywhere. The unmistakable mark of human presence. Children. Not adults. Children had lived here. One blanket had faded cartoon horses printed on it. Hank felt a punch to his gut. Lily Carter had loved horses. Everyone in Cedar Basin knew that. Every photo ever shown on the news had her standing beside a Palomino filly, grinning big enough to crack the frame. But blankets could be traded. Bought, found. It didn't mean anything certain. He forced himself to breathe. Bruno nosed the blanket once, inhaled deeply, and his entire body changed. His muscles tightened. He stepped back, paced once in a tight circle, then returned to the far opening and looked back at Hank. The dog's eyes said it plainly. "We're not finished. We're not alone down here, are we?" Hank whispered. Bruno answered with a short bark. Not an alert, a command, crisp and demanding. "Follow me." Hank crouched to fit through the second opening. The air was colder here, thick with the scent of old smoke and water seeping from the rock. Bruno crawled ahead, claws ticking faster now. Halfway through the second passage, another noise echoed through the stone. Not a clang this time. A whisper, a breath, a muffled cry quickly swallowed. Someone trying not to be heard? Hank felt his blood go cold. He shifted his weight forward. The passage widened, revealing another small hollow carved by time and hidden by design. There, a flash of movement, a pale shape darting behind a stack of crates near the wall. Bruno froze, then lowered his head and took a cautious step forward. The growl in his throat grew heavier, but stayed controlled. The rumble of a dog warning, not attacking. "Hello?" Hank said softly. "It's all right, I won't hurt you." Silence. Then a whisper so small it could have been imagination. "Go away." Hank's heart seized. It was a girl's voice, high, weak, terrified. "Lily?" he breathed, the name leaving him before he could stop it. The crates shifted. Hank stood perfectly still, aware of the weight of the moment. The 5-year ache in the town's chest seemed to settle on his shoulders all at once. Bruno suddenly stepped sideways, blocking Hank with his body. Not aggressive, protective. Another twist hit Hank fast and clean. This girl wasn't alone. Behind the crates, he heard another breath. Shallower, almost like someone struggling to breathe quietly. 2 children. Bruno stood motionless, tail stiff, ears forward, eyes locked on the crates. Hank watched the dog's body language shift again, subtle but powerful. Recognition. Memory. A thread connecting past and present. Something Hank couldn't see but Bruno undoubtedly could. The dog leaned forward and sniffed the air near the crates, then let out a single, trembling whimper. "Bruno," Hank whispered, voice breaking. "Is it them?" The shepherd's gaze sharpened. He took 3 steps into the room, slow and certain, as if stepping toward something sacred. Then a small hand appeared, trembling, fingers thin as twigs. Bruno didn't move. He didn't bark. He just breathed, one slow exhale through his nose, a sound Hank had never heard from him before. Not warning, not fear. Recognition. Hank took a step forward. The hand vanished again, and something scraped inside the crates. A panicked shuffle, a gasp, then a second voice, even smaller, even more afraid. "He's back." Hank's breath caught. Who was back? What had been coming and going from this place? Bruno spun around suddenly, face snapping towards the darkness behind them. A noise carried faintly through the crack they'd entered from. Soft, heavy, a boot shifting gravel. Someone else was in the canyon. Someone who knew these girls. Bruno's lips curled, but not in anger. In certainty. He knew whoever was out there, and whoever it was, Bruno did not want Hank facing him unprepared. The shepherd stepped forward, planting himself between Hank and the entrance. Hank felt the weight of it. Whatever they had just found wasn't old, and whoever they had just heard was coming back for them. Bruno growled low, a sound that filled the hollow like thunder. The cave had never felt smaller, and the truth closing in on them had never felt closer. The passage dipped sharply and then widened without warning, opening into a chamber far larger than anything Hank expected. His boots scraped rock as he stepped down. The air was colder here, heavier, carrying the metallic tang of old tools, rust, and something else beneath it. Something like fear that had soaked into the stone. Bruno entered first, body low, head forward, every muscle braced as if expecting a fight. His growl spread through the bunker like a slow echo. Hank's eyes adjusted to the dimness. This wasn't a natural hollow, it was cut by hand, reinforced with timber beams and scrap metal. A lantern hung from a hook, its flame turned low. Wooden crates lined the walls, each filled with canned food, bottled water, blankets. A cot sat pushed against the far end, its bedding flat and cold. Someone lived here. Someone prepared to. And someone had spent a long time making sure this place stayed invisible. A shuffle came from the right. Bruno's growl sharpened instantly. Hank turned. A girl stepped from behind a beam, thin arms wrapped around herself, long hair tangled and half hiding her face. She looked older than the photos that had haunted the town 5 years ago, but her eyes, wide, afraid, not trusting the light, were unmistakable. Lily Carter. She was alive. Her small voice cracked. "Please don't yell, he gets angry." Hank felt the world tilt. His throat tightened. But before he could speak, Lily looked past him, toward the dark passage he had entered from, and flinched so hard her knees buckled. Bruno pressed against Hank's leg, blocking the girl from whatever she sensed coming. Footsteps echoed. Slow, controlled, confident. A man emerged from the shadows of a side corridor, hand brushing the stone as though the canyon belonged to him. He was broad-shouldered, wearing an old SR jacket faded to grey. Beard trimmed, boots clean. His face was older than Hank remembered, but the walk, the set of his jaw, the quiet authority in his posture. Walter Hodge, the hero of the search 5 years ago, the man people trusted, the man who had organized the search grid and told everyone which areas were already covered, the man who'd stood at community vigils with a steady voice and a reassuring smile. He stopped at the entrance of the bunker and looked Hank up and down as if measuring how much trouble he'd walked into. "Well," Hodge said, voice calm, almost warm. "Didn't expect to see you here, Hank." Hank swallowed. "Where's Zoe?" Hodge smiled. "Slow. Wrong. Resting. She's been a little sick." Lily's eyes filled with tears. Her voice shook. "He locked her in the dry room." Hank's stomach dropped. Before he could move, Hodge took one step forward. Bruno exploded. He lunged ahead, teeth bared, planting himself squarely between Hank and Hodge with such violence that Hank stumbled backward. Bruno's hackles stood up like a ridge of dark spears. His growl deepened until it vibrated through the floorboards beneath their feet. Hodge didn't flinch. That made it worse. "Call off your dog," he said. "This is private property. You're trespassing, Hank, and I would really hate for a misunderstanding to get someone hurt." Hank felt anger rise, hot and sharp. "You kept them here. 5 years. Why, Walter? Why?" Walter lifted both hands slightly, as if calming a nervous horse. His voice stayed level, steady, too steady. "You don't understand. None of you ever understood. I saved them. I saved those girls from a world that would have eaten them alive." Lily made a small noise, half sob, half protest. Bruno snarled louder. "Staying hidden is the only way to keep them safe." Hodge continued. "People twist things. They judge. They blame. You remember what happened in town, the whispers, the accusations, their families falling apart. I took the girls somewhere quiet, somewhere safe." Hank stared at him in disbelief. "You took them. You hid them. You let an entire town grieve them as dead. They were better off here." Hodge snapped. His calm cracked around the edges. "You think living with their parents would have saved them? Those people were suffocating them. I gave them a home, a routine, protection." Protection. The word tasted foul. Hank stepped forward, fists clenched. "You kidnapped 2 children, Walter." The man didn't step back. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Hank the way someone studies an injured animal deciding whether to put it down. "I didn't want you in here," he said quietly. "You were always too sensitive, too curious. I knew if anyone ever came close to finding us, it would be you or one of those damn dogs." His gaze dropped to Bruno. And of all dogs, it had to be him. Hank blinked. "You know, Bruno." Hodge's smile returned, colder now. "He was on my team, my canine for the first 2 weeks of the search. Smart, too smart. I had to rotate him out before he tracked something I wasn't ready for people to find." Bruno barked once, a violent cutting sound that echoed through the bunker. Recognition. Memory. Accusation. Hodge took another step, now close enough that Bruno's lips lifted further, exposing white teeth. "You can go, Hank," Hodge said softly. "Leave the canyon. Forget this place. I'll let you walk out. But the girls stay." Lily shook her head, barely breathing. Her whisper cut the air like a knife. "Please don't leave us." Hank's pulse hammered. Everything in him, the guilt, the grief, the failure of 5 long years, rose at once. He wasn't leaving them. Not now. Not ever. But Hodge wasn't finished. "You step outside," he said, voice turning low, "and I will claim self-defense, an armed trespasser on my land. No one will question it. Not out here. I've worn a badge for 20 years. People trust me more than they trust a rancher who lives alone with a dog he barely understands. Bruno's growl snapped like tension wire. The air changed. The canyon seemed to tighten. Lily pressed back against the wall. Hank braced his weight evenly on his feet, hands curling into fists. For a breathless beat, no one moved. Then Hodge reached for something tucked behind his belt. Bruno launched before Hank saw what it was. The dog struck with a force that shook the room, slamming into Hodge's arm, knocking whatever he was holding clattering across the stone. Hodge let out a shocked curse and stumbled backward, Bruno driving him toward the wall with a furious snarl. The object skidded to a stop near Hank's boot. A keyring. 4 keys. One labeled Dry Room. Hank realized, with a cold clarity that felt like steel sliding into his spine, that the girls had never been lost. They had been taken, hidden, kept. And Bruno, 5 years ago, had tried to lead the search to the truth. Now he wasn't giving Walter Hodge a second chance to bury it. Hank grabbed the keys. Bruno pinned Hodge against the wall. Teeth inches from the man's throat. And the canyon finally told Hank the truth he had dreaded for years. The monster they searched for had been leading the search all along. Bruno held Walter Hodge against the wall, teeth bared, hackles raised high as steel bristles. His growl pulsed through the bunker, a living warning. Hank could see the muscles in the dog's shoulders coil, ready to strike again if Hodge even twitched. But a sound broke through the chaos, a soft, trembling cough. Hank turned. A second girl stepped into the weak lantern light from a narrow side room. Smaller than Lily. Fragile. Her cheeks hollow, her eyes wide and glazed with exhaustion. She leaned on the wall as though even standing required everything she had left. Zoe Mitchell. 5 years older, thinner, but unquestionably her. She froze when she saw Hank. Then her gaze locked onto Bruno with something like desperate hope. That hope flickered out when Hodge moved. He didn't fight Bruno. He used the moment. With a sudden, violent jerk, he twisted sideways. Bruno lunged but missed by inches. Hodge shoved a storage crate toward the dog, forcing Bruno to stumble, growling and regaining his balance. In the chaos, Hodge grabbed Lily by the arm and yanked her back towards the hallway. Zoe cried out, "No, Walter, stop, please stop." Hodge didn't stop. He dragged Lily behind him with brute strength, grabbed Zoe by her wrist, and shoved both girls into the narrow chamber where Zoe had been hiding. Before Hank could lunge forward, he slammed the reinforced metal door. The lock clicked into place. He spun, chest heaving, eyes wild. One hand reached around his back, under his jacket. Hank saw the movement too late. Hodge drew a gun. Bruno positioned himself instantly between Hank and the barrel, shoulders squared, stance wide, a silent declaration that Hank wouldn't be dying today. Hodge's voice shook, not with fear, but with a fanatic certainty that chilled the air. "You shouldn't have come here, Hank. You ruined everything. I protected them. I kept them alive when no one else could." "You kidnapped them," Hank said. "You stole their lives." "I saved their lives." Hodge snapped. "The world outside didn't deserve them. Their parents didn't deserve them. You people lost hope after a month. I never did." Bruno snarled, low and steady. Hodge's weapon swung in a quick arc from Hank to the dog. "One step closer and I'll put him down." Hank's stomach clenched. Bruno didn't move, but the growl stopped abruptly. Not surrender, strategy. Waiting, reading, choosing the exact second to strike. Hank raised both hands slowly. "Walter, listen to yourself. These are children. They're terrified." "They're safe," Walter hissed. "I made a home for them, a life. Now you want to tear that away because you're too blind to see the truth." The truth. Hank felt the word sting. 5 years of searching. 5 years of grief for a community that assumed the worst. All while the hero of the search had been hiding the girls in a canyon he personally declared cleared. Hank looked toward the metal door imprisoning the girls. He could hear Lily sobbing, Zoe whispering something, maybe trying to calm her, maybe praying. He had a choice. He could stay and fight for them and likely die. Or he could flee, get help, bring the sheriff, bring the whole damn state trooper force. But that would take time, and time, in a place like this, could kill. Bruno turned his head toward Hank. A brief glance, but in Bruno's eyes there was something unmistakable. Resolve, expectation, a plea. We can't abandon them. Hank swallowed hard. Bruno. The dog didn't break eye contact. He knew the girls. Somehow, deep in the marrow of him, he knew them. Their scent, their fear, their history. Perhaps he had known them from those first days of the search, before he was rotated out. Maybe he had even tried to lead the search team here once, and no one listened. Now Bruno wasn't letting Hank make the same mistake. Hodge shifted his stance, finger tightening on the trigger. Turn around and leave, Hank, alone. I'll give you that chance. Let them go, Hank said. His voice cracked. They're somebody's daughters. They're mine now. That final word detonated something inside Hank. He took a half step back, slowly, carefully. Hodge tracked the movement with the muzzle of his gun. That's it. Out, now. Bruno didn't move. Come on, boy, Hank whispered. Bruno didn't budge. Hodge's voice sharpened. The dog stays. Hank froze. If he pushed Bruno to leave, the dog wouldn't obey. And if Hodge realized that, he might shoot Bruno on the spot. Another choice. A cruel one. Hank's chest tightened. He moved one step farther toward the entrance. Walter, you said you'd let me go. I'm leaving. He kept his voice steady. Neutral. Even. But inside his mind raced. How far could he get without tipping Hodge off? How close to the canyon rim could he get before Hodge realized the dog wasn't following? If Hodge sensed the truth, he might shoot the girls, or Bruno, or Hank. Every step was a gamble. Hank reached the narrow passage. The cold air brushed his face. The exit was only a few yards away. Behind him, Bruno remained planted firmly, every muscle coiled. Protecting, bracing, choosing. Hank whispered under his breath, so softly the canyon almost swallowed it. Good boy, buy me a little time. It wasn't a command. It was permission. Bruno's body lowered further, stance wide, ready to strike or shield depending on what the next second demanded. Hodge shouted after Hank, voice sharp and suspicious. Turn around, hands where I can see them. Hank did. Their eyes met across the bunker. Hodge didn't see the truth yet. But he would, and Hank would have only minutes to get to high ground, reach a cell signal, and call the sheriff. Minutes before, Hodge realized Hank wasn't coming back. Minutes before he might take his rage out on the girls. Minutes before Bruno would be forced to face a gun alone. Hank's throat tightened, and for the first time in years he felt the sting of helpless tears. Hang on, Bruno, he whispered. Bruno gave the smallest nod. Not human, not spoken, but understood. Hank turned and ran. The moment he disappeared into the crack between the rocks, he heard Hodge's furious shout echo behind him, and Bruno's bark, deep, defiant, buying Hank the seconds he needed, seconds that might cost Bruno his life. But Hank didn't stop. He couldn't, because he knew the truth now. This wasn't about courage, it was about sacrifice, the kind only a loyal heart could make. And Bruno had already made his choice. The sirens arrived before the sun fully dipped behind the red cliffs. Their echo rolled through Cedar Basin like a storm warning. State troopers, county deputies, and the tactical response team fanned out across the narrow entrance of hidden Still Canyon. Red and blue lights flashed against the sandstone walls, turning the canyon into a jagged pulse of color and dread. Hank stood among them, chest still heaving from the run. Snow flurries drifted sideways in the wind, sharp as sand, but none of it mattered. He stared into the darkness of the fissure where he'd left Bruno. He prayed he'd bought the dog enough time. Sheriff Dalton Reeves, grey-bearded, broad-shouldered and exhausted, strode toward Hank. "You'd better be damn sure about what you saw," Reeves said. His voice trembled at the edges. "Because if those girls are alive inside that bunker, every second we waste puts a loaded gun closer to their heads." "He has them," Hank said, "and he'll kill them if he realizes we're coming." A shot cracked from deep inside the canyon. The deputies dove behind trucks and boulders. Dust rained down from the cliffside. Hank felt his heart drop into his stomach. "He knows." "No," Reeves muttered. "He's warning us." Another shot exploded. This one closer, angrier. Reeves raised the bullhorn. His voice boomed through the canyon. "Walter Hodge, this is Sheriff Reeves. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Release the girls, and nobody else gets hurt." Silence. Wind hissed through the canyon, carrying a faint echo of a girl's sob. Then Walter's voice rose, warped by fanatic conviction. "You can't take them. They are clean. They are safe. They are mine to protect. You people don't understand. The outside world is poison." Reeves muttered, "He's lost his damn mind." Another shot spat sparks off the rock beside a deputy's helmet. "Sniper?" Reeves asked. "Negative," one of the tactical officers replied. "He's shooting from cover inside the structure. No line of sight. Then we go in on foot." "Not possible," another replied. "The bunker's built into a choke point. He designed it. He knows every angle. Any entry is a kill corridor." Hank stepped forward. "There's another way in. A crack behind the junipers. A hidden passage to the basin. That's how I got inside." Reeves's eyes narrowed. "Could we send a team through it?" Hank shook his head. "Too narrow. You'd lose half your gear in the first 10 feet, and he'd hear you scraping the walls." A scream echoed, short, terrified, cut off abruptly. "Zoe." Hank's hands shook. "We're running out of time." As if sensing the panic in Hank's chest, Bruno appeared at the edge of the shadows. He emerged from the fissure like a ghost, panting hard, coat dusted with sand. The deputies raised their rifles until they realized it was just a dog. Bruno sprinted straight to Hank, circling him in frantic loops before facing the canyon again. He barked once, hard, urgent. "He wants to go back," Hank whispered. Reeves scoffed. "That canyon is an active gunfight. That's suicide." But Bruno wasn't barking randomly. He was barking toward the hidden crack, toward the same path Hank escaped through, toward the bunker. Hank knelt. "Show me, boy." Bruno barked again, pawing at the ground, pacing toward the fissure, back to Hank, then toward the canyon once more, repeating the same pattern with desperate precision. A tactical officer frowned. "That dog's not guessing. He's tracking something." Reeves folded his arms. "What the hell kind of ranch dog knows a route like that?" Hank hesitated. He'd wondered the same thing. But Bruno's actions weren't random. They were trained, disciplined, intentional. The tactical officer gave a slow nod. "Sheriff, that's the behavior of a former K-9, search and rescue or tracking." Reeves turned to Hank sharply. "Where'd you get him?" Hank swallowed. "Adopted him from a K-9 retirement program in Cedar Ridge 3 years ago. They said he washed out from active duty early because he wouldn't take commands from new handlers." Bruno growled low, as if offended. The officer stepped closer, studying Bruno's posture. "That's not a washout. That's a veteran who lost his original team. A dog like that doesn't forget a scent." Reeves blinked. "Scent? What scent?" The officer answered softly. "Children." Hank's throat tightened. A twist he hadn't seen until now clicked into place. 5 years ago, Walter Hodge had been part of the initial search. He'd been assigned a young canine to help track the missing girls, a German shepherd, a male, smart, loyal, Relentless. Bruno. Reeves exhaled sharply. Jesus, he knew them. He must have tracked the girls once, before Hodge rotated him out. The tactical officer nodded. Hodge likely removed the dog because he got too close to the truth. Bruno barked sharply, as though confirming it. Reeves stared down at the dog in stunned silence. So you've been trying to bring someone back to that canyon for years. Bruno stared right into the sheriff's eyes, unblinking, determined, a soldier demanding his mission be understood. Wind cut through the canyon, carrying Zoe's terrified scream. That broke everything. Hank grabbed Reeves's arm. Let him go in. He can reach them through the hidden crack. You said a team can't fit, but Bruno can. He already knows the route. He knows the girls. Let him distract Hodge. Give your team an opening. Reeves hesitated. Sending him in is sending him to die. Hank's voice dropped. Sheriff, he already decided he will. The question is whether we let that sacrifice mean something. Reeves looked at the dog, at the canyon, back at the bunker they still couldn't breach. Then another gunshot boomed from inside, followed by Lily screaming, Please stop! Please! Bruno jolted like lightning. Reeves cursed under his breath and turned to his tactical commander. Prep for breach. The dog goes first. Bruno didn't wait for permission. The moment Hank whispered, Go, the German shepherd bolted across the gravel, slipped into the fissure, and vanished into the dark. The tactical team moved immediately, switching positions, preparing for the window Bruno was about to create. Reeves exhaled. God help that dog. Hank whispered, He doesn't need help. He's going home. Inside the canyon, a distant gunshot echoed. Then another sound followed. Bruno's roar, not a bark, not a warning, a war cry. And suddenly, for the first time since the girls vanished 5 long years ago, hope burned brighter than fear. Inside the hidden basin, the air felt heavier than stone. The bunker door rattled from the gunfire outside, dust drifting from the ceiling with every distant blast. Walter Hodge stood in the narrow entryway, rifle trembling in his hands. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, a mix of adrenaline and the fractured beliefs that had ruled his world for 5 long, distorted years. Zoe sobbed in the corner. Lily stood between her and Walter, body rigid, eyes darting from him to the heavy door. She looked older than her age in ways that broke the heart. Then a new sound sliced through the bunker, a low, resonant growl. Walter spun. No, that's impossible. Bruno emerged from the rear passage like a shadow peeling itself from the earth. Dust clung to his coat. His ears were forward, body taut, eyes locked on the man holding the rifle. The German shepherd did not bark. He only growled, deep and bone-shaking, the sound of a creature who had known fear and refused to feel it again. Lily gasped. Bruno? The dog's head snapped toward her. A soft whine broke through the growl. Recognition, relief, love. She whispered again, stronger this time. Bruno. That was all it took. Zoe bolted first, scrambling across the room. Bruno stepped aside just long enough for her to pass, then pressed his body against her leg, as if guiding her toward the exit. Lily followed, grabbing. Zoe's wrist pulling her along. Walter backed up, gun shaking. Stop, they can't go out there, it's not safe. The world out there. It's burned, poisoned. I saved you, I kept you alive. Lily didn't stop. You lied to us. Walter's whole body went still at the words. Outside, the tactical team heard the girls screaming and moved instantly. Reeves's voice thundered through the canyon. Go now! The deputies surged forward. Inside the bunker, Walter raised the gun, but not at the girls. At the door. At the world outside. I can't let them take you, he whispered, voice cracking like dry bark. I can't lose my family again. Bruno growled louder. The dog stepped between Walter and the children, every muscle flared, tail stiff, head low. Bruno didn't attack. He warned. He pleaded in the way only a trained canine could. Walter's eyes flicked to Bruno, then widened. Recognition dawned, jagged and painful. You were the search dog. You followed them 5 years ago. Bruno held his stare. Walter staggered. His grip on the weapon faltered. You tracked them back then. I pulled you off the search, told them you weren't fit. But you kept looking. He lowered the rifle an inch. A breath, a tremor. Then the girls made the final break. Lily grabbed Zoe's hand and shouted, "Now, Bruno!" And they sprinted toward the door. Walter didn't chase, he didn't scream, he didn't fire, he just sagged, shoulders collapsing inward. "Are they safe?" he asked, barely audible. "Are they really safe?" Bruno stepped forward, closing the distance, eyes locked on Walter's face. The dog didn't growl anymore. He simply stared with the same unwavering honesty that had guided him across canyons and storms. Walter's hand loosened on the rifle. His eyes grew watery, unfocused. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. After the wildfire, after losing my family, my mind just broke open. I thought the world had ended. I thought I was giving them a new one." A single tear slid down his cheek. Walter Hodge placed the rifle on the floor and stepped back. When the tactical team detonated the door, he didn't fight. He didn't reach for the weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He lifted his hands, palms trembling. "It's over," he said. "Just make sure they're okay." The deputies swarmed past him and found Lily and Zoe outside the entry tunnel, clinging to each other in the cold twilight. Their faces were pale, thin, but alive. When they saw Hank, they sprinted toward him. He caught them, arms shaking around their fragile bodies. Zoe sobbed into his chest. Lily whispered, "Thank you," over and over, voice breaking with relief. Bruno trotted out behind them, tail wagging for the first time in years. He pressed his head against the girls' legs as though counting them, confirming they were real. Hank sank to his knees beside him. "You did it, boy." The German shepherd nudged Hank's hand, then licked Zoe's cheek as she cried into his fur. Lily wrapped both arms around Bruno's neck, burying her face in the warm coat she remembered from a childhood cut short. The canyon filled with the sound of deputies calling out confirmation codes. Reeves radioed for medics. Snow drifted down in soft flakes, as though the storm had paused to witness the moment. The world didn't end. Hope had not died. A dog had refused to let it. Walter Hodge was escorted out of the basin, head lowered, no longer the man he had feared becoming. When he saw the girls shivering under blankets, alive and breathing in the cold air, he whispered, "I'm sorry," and didn't resist as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. Bruno watched him go with a quiet sadness, not anger, as if he understood brokenness when he saw it. And in the jagged, frozen silence of Cedar Basin, justice and healing finally touched the same ground. 5 years lost, 2 lives saved, and a dog who refused to quit until the truth was found. A year passed, but the canyon's echo lingered in Ridge Hollow like a memory carved into the stone itself. Winter had come and gone. Spring rolled over the valley in soft green waves. The scars remained, quiet but undeniable. And yet, the town breathed differently now. It breathed as though someone had opened a window in a long, sealed room. On the first mild morning of April, the people of Ridge Hollow gathered near the new rescue center built on the edge of town. It smelled of fresh lumber, new concrete, and hope they weren't sure they deserved. Children climbed the railings. Former search volunteers stood silently with hands clasped behind their backs. Old ranchers brought their hats to their chests. In the center of the courtyard stood a bronze statue no taller than a teenager. It depicted a German shepherd in mid-stance, ears forward, one paw raised as if catching a scent carried off the desert wind. A small plaque at the base read, "Bruno for refusing to leave the canyon." Hank Marlowe didn't want a speech, but somehow he ended up standing in front of the crowd anyway. He was older now, not in his bones, but in his eyes. He cleared his throat, keeping one hand lightly resting on Bruno's back. The dog sat beside him, posture regal without trying, gaze calm, almost solemn. He didn't save the girls because someone told him to, Hank said. He saved them because he remembered who he was, and he remembered who they were. People nodded quietly. Some wiped tears. And maybe, Hank added, he remembered what it felt like to be lost. His voice caught, but no one judged him for it. After the ceremony, townspeople drifted toward him, one by one, leaving flowers or small wooden tokens at the statue's base. Bruno accepted every pat with patience, though his attention never strayed far from the two girls sitting on the bench across the courtyard. Lily and Zoe looked older now, taller, but fragile in ways most kids their age weren't. Lily wore her hair short, a quiet choice she'd made the week she came home. Zoe still hugged her backpack with both arms when she felt overwhelmed, the way she had inside the bunker. But today, both girls managed small, shy smiles. Zoe was the first to break from the bench. She walked to Bruno slowly, like approaching a familiar dream. He rose to meet her, touching his nose gently to her hand. She let out a shaky breath and leaned her forehead against his muzzle. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "We made it." Bruno licked her cheek once, soft and deliberate. Lily stood a few steps back, fingers twisting nervously. She still struggled with crowds, with sudden noises, with the feeling of being watched. Therapy was helping, but the canyon lived inside her in ways she didn't always understand. Bruno noticed her hesitation. He stepped away from Zoe, walked toward Lily, and sat directly in front of her. She closed her eyes. He nudged her hand. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction. She whispered, "You came for us." Bruno didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood grounded and steady, offering the one thing therapy couldn't manufacture, trust without condition. The girls' families watched from nearby. Their parents wore expressions stitched from joy and grief in equal measure. Healing was slow work. Sometimes it meant sitting outside their daughters' rooms all night because a nightmare refused to loosen its grip. Sometimes it meant turning off the news because it sounded too much like the bunker's silence. Sometimes it meant relearning how to speak without fear. But the girls were alive. And that alone rebuilt something in every home on their street. Hank spent more time in town than he used to. He helped at the rescue center, teaching kids how to approach nervous animals and showing volunteers how to repair fencing without spooking the horses. People began to seek him out, not for advice, but for the steadiness he carried. One afternoon, Sheriff Reeves approached him near the arena fence. Reeves looked older, too, grief in his beard, regret in his posture. "You did good, Hank," Reeves said. "You and that dog changed everything." "We all did our part," Hank replied. "Even Hodge." Reeves frowned. "You really believe that?" Hank took a breath. "A man that broken doesn't come back from a fire without carrying some of it inside him, doesn't excuse anything. But rescuing him wasn't just about saving the girls. It was about stopping whatever he was turning into." Reeves looked towards the distant courthouse. "He asks about them, you know. Every month. Wants to know they're safe. Never asks for forgiveness, just if they're okay." Hank nodded. Maybe that's his punishment. Reeves didn't argue. Later that week, Lily and Zoe visited the ranch for the first time since the rescue. Hank watched from the porch as Bruno led them along the fence line like a tour guide with nowhere else to be. The girls laughed softly, the sound rusty but real. Lily paused beside a gatepost. "Can we come back again?" "You can come back every day," Hank said. Bruno's been waiting for you." "And you?" Zoe asked. Hank smiled at the ground. "I guess I was waiting too." As the sun lowered over the red cliffs, the three of them sat quietly with Bruno stretched between them like a bridge built from patience and memory. The wind moved through the basin with a gentler voice now, carrying no more screams, no gunfire, no lies, just the soft rustle of grass and a distant hawk circling high above. Normal life was not something you returned to. It was something you rebuilt, one small piece at a time. And Ridge Hollow, battered and humbled, rebuilt right alongside them, because a dog had refused to walk away. The morning light over Ridge Hollow had a softer quality now, as if the valley itself had learned how to breathe again. A thin mist clung to the fields around Hank Marlowe's ranch, glowing pale gold as the sun rose behind the ridgeline. The world felt gentler here, or maybe Hank was finally learning to see it that way. Bruno lay stretched across the porch, chin resting on his paws. One ear twitched lazily at the sound of tires crunching gravel. Hank stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jeans as a white school van rolled to a stop in front of the gate. A dozen middle schoolers spilled out, notebooks and cameras in hand. Their teacher, Ms. Callahan, waved awkwardly. "Mr. Marlowe, thank you for agreeing to this. The kids are doing a project on local heroes and, well, nobody else in Utah has a story quite like yours." Hank grunted. "It's not mine." He nodded toward Bruno. "He's the one they want." At the sound of his name, Bruno rose. He shook himself, then trotted down the porch steps, tail swaying in a calm, deliberate arc. The kids gasped. One whispered, "That's him. That's the dog from the canyon." Bruno sat in front of them, posture proud but patient, like he knew this was his part. Ms. Callahan gestured. "All right, class, you can ask Mr. Marlowe your questions." A small hand shot up immediately. A boy with freckles and a cracked voice asked, "How did Bruno know the girls were still alive?" Hank took a slow breath. It was a question he'd heard more times than he could count, but he never answered it the way people expected. "It wasn't about knowing," Hank said. "It was about refusing to quit." "But dogs don't think like that," another kid argued. "They don't make choices like people do." Hank smiled faintly. "You ever lost someone?" The class shuffled quietly. A few nodded. "When you love someone," Hank continued, "you look for them even when the world tells you there's no chance." Bruno, he remembered Lily and Zoe. He remembered their scent, their fear, their hope. He carried that memory for 5 years. Every time the wind shifted, every time we passed that canyon, something in him pulled. A girl stepped closer, voice small. "So he wasn't just guessing?" "No," Hank said. "He was choosing." Bruno seemed to understand the conversation. He nudged Hank's knee with his head, then turned to the kids, sniffing their notebooks as if checking for approval. One of the boys lifted a camera. "Can we take pictures?" Bruno sat taller, chest out, almost posing. Hank chuckled. "He's used to it." The kids circled him, snapping photos, touching his fur gently, asking a storm of questions. Hank answered what he could, but the moments that struck him most were the silent ones, when the children simply watched Bruno as if trying to understand what made a living creature carry loyalty for half a decade. Eventually, Ms. Callahan called them back together. "Before we go, Mr. Marlowe, could you tell them the real story, the one no newspaper printed?" Hank hesitated, then nodded. He stepped closer to the group, resting a hand on the railing of the porch, looking out toward the canyon where it all began. "You all know the rescue," Hank said quietly. "But what you don't know is what came before it." The kids leaned in. "I wasn't looking for anyone that day," he said. "Wasn't trying to solve a mystery. I was just an old man checking fence lines, and Bruno was just a retired canine looking for a place to belong. But that canyon, it wasn't new to him. He'd been there before, on the first search, before he got reassigned. Ms. Callahan looked surprised. But the reports never said they didn't know. Hank said, or maybe they didn't want to know. He looked down at Bruno, who watched him with steady eyes. He wasn't given orders back then. He wasn't brought close enough to the trail, but he felt something, and when the world forgot those girls existed, he didn't. One of the kids whispered, "That's why they call him the dog who refused to leave." Hank nodded. Bruno didn't find them because he's special. He found them because he refused to walk away, even from a trail colder than stone. The class fell silent, the kind of silence heavy enough to mean something. A girl with bright braids raised her hand. "Mr. Marlowe, do you think a dog can love someone enough to come back for them? Even after years?" Hank looked toward the ridge, where the desert wind carried echoes from a place he'd tried to forget. "The way I see it," he said softly, "Bruno didn't come back for them." The kids waited. He never left. A hush swept through the group. Even Bruno seemed to hold still, as if honoring the weight of the words. Before they returned to the van, the students placed something at the base of the porch steps, a hand-painted wooden sign cut into the shape of a bone. Across the center, in careful childish lettering, "Bruno, the dog, who refused to leave." When the engine rumbled and the van pulled away, Hank stood for a while in the fading light. Bruno pressed his side against Hank's leg, solid and warm. The legacy wasn't a statue or a plaque. It was a truth every child in that van would carry home, that sometimes the bravest heroes walk on 4 legs, and sometimes the heart that refuses to give up doesn't belong to a human at all. The late autumn sun burned a soft copper glow across Cedar Basin as the townspeople gathered at the entrance of the newly built Bruno Canyon Rescue Center. The building wasn't large, just a renovated ranger station with cedar siding and a modest flagpole, but the atmosphere carried weight. Cameras clicked, reporters jostled for position, and families who had once known only grief now held on to hope as if it were something tangible. At the front, Hank Marlowe stood beside a polished wooden plaque engraved with Bruno's name. His hands were rough, his shoulders stiff in his clean denim jacket, but there was something gentler in the way he kept glancing down at the German shepherd sitting by his side. Bruno sat tall, alert, yet strangely calm. It was as if he understood the ceremony wasn't about fame, but responsibility. The canyon winds swept across the gathering, stirring dust and whispers from the red cliffs that towered behind them. A reporter from Salt Lake Tribune stepped forward. "Mr. Marlowe," she said, lowering her microphone toward him, "this center is dedicated to the rescue that changed the entire valley. But there's one question everyone keeps asking. Why did you keep Bruno with you through everything?" The crowd shifted. Cameras lifted. Hank's eyes softened. He placed a steady hand on Bruno's neck, fingers sinking into the familiar, thick fur. "He didn't just find the girls," Hank said quietly. "He found the truth we all tried to bury. And somehow, he saved me too." The reporter paused, clearly taken aback. "Saved you how, sir?" Hank looked past the crowd, past the brand-new sign, past the center itself, letting his gaze settle on the mouth of hidden Still Canyon. The memory of that first day flashed through him. The cold, the fear, the moment he realized loneliness had become a habit he no longer questioned. "I spent 5 years convincing myself I didn't need anyone after my wife died," Hank said. "But this dog, he refused to let me stay lost. He chose to care when I couldn't. He remembered those girls when the world forgot. And he reminded me what it means to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves." Bruno leaned his weight gently against Hank's leg, as if confirming every word. The reporter swallowed, then asked, "What would you want people to take away from this story?" Hank turned fully to the camera now. His voice was low, but carried through the canyon air. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The wind picked up as if answering. It swept across the crowd, lifting jackets and hair, bending the tall grass around the center. Bruno looked toward the canyon, pupils sharpening, posture shifting into something almost sentinel-like. He stared into the shadows between the cliffs as though listening for echoes no human ear could pick up. A hush settled over the attendees. For a moment, it felt like the canyon itself was watching them back. Then another sound emerged, the soft crunch of gravel behind the podium. Lily Carter and Zoe Mitchell, now healthier, now braver, walked forward from where they had been waiting with their families. Zoe's hand rested protectively on Lily's shoulder. Both girls approached Bruno, and he immediately rose, tail lowering slightly in a posture of calm recognition. They pressed their faces into his fur. A photographer lowered her camera, tears slipping down her cheek. "They trust him more than anyone," she whispered. "They should," Hank replied. A few yards away, Sheriff Dalton stepped beside Hank. "We ran another sweep of the canyon this morning," he said quietly. "Nothing new, but it still feels like there's more down there." Hank nodded. "Bruno thinks so too." Dalton eyed the dog. "You think he'll ever stop checking that place?" Hank laughed once under his breath. "Not a chance." As the ribbon-cutting ceremony concluded, families wandered through the center, admiring memorials and signing donation boards. Kids knelt to take pictures with Bruno. Volunteers spoke with survivors. A local veteran group offered to help with search and rescue training. The day felt hopeful, but Hank noticed something. Every few minutes, Bruno drifted away from the crowd, pausing to stare at the canyon again. It was not fear or unease. It was duty. The kind carved into instinct, not taught. Hank walked over and stood beside him. "You still hear something?" Bruno didn't look at him. His ears remained angled toward the narrow passage where the junipers swayed in the wind. His muscles tense, his breath steady. Hank exhaled. "We'll check again tomorrow." Bruno finally looked up, giving one slow blink. Agreement. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky gold and violet. Guests began to leave. Children waved. The Carter and Mitchell families hugged Hank, then knelt to thank Bruno in their own quiet ways. At last the grounds emptied until only Hank and his dog remained. The wind swept low across the basin, humming through the canyon like a promise. Bruno stood still for one last moment. Then he turned to Hank, nudged his hand, and started walking toward home. Hank followed, glancing back once at the new rescue center. The lights glowed warm in the dusk, but the canyon beyond it loomed dark and unbroken. Some stories had endings, others had guardians. As Hank and Bruno crossed the field, Hank called out over his shoulder, speaking not to a reporter this time, but to anyone who might someday hear the tale. "If you've ever loved a loyal dog," he said, "support the German Shepherd stories. These dogs don't just save lives. They teach us how to live." Bruno barked once, sharp and certain, echoing into the canyon. The wind carried it far, far enough that, for a heartbeat, it felt like something in the shadows barked back.